The sun hung gently over the sleepy coastal town of Westbridge on that warm June afternoon in 1985. It was the first day of summer vacation, and the streets buzzed with the energy of children freed from the classroom. Among them were Lily and Grace Tanners, sisters aged 9 and 7, inseparable, curious, and always full of laughter. They had finished their morning chores and, after lunch, asked their mother if they could play outside like they always did. With a nod and a reminder to stay close, their mother watched from the screen door as they skipped down the street, hand in hand, their giggles fading into the salty breeze. The girls were known to frequent the nearby beach trail, a short walk from their home. It was their little world, a place where they collected seashells, built driftwood forts, and imagined adventures involving sea monsters and buried treasure. That day was no different. Lily wore a yellow sundress and Grace had her favorite pink sneakers, which she insisted gave her super speed. They brought their usual plastic bucket and a small notebook where Lily liked to draw whatever they found on the shore. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. By dinner time, the Tanners, home filled with an uneasy quiet. Their mother glanced at the clock again. It wasn't like them to be late. Still calm, she stepped outside and called their names down the road. No answer. She walked to the corner store, asked the clerk if they'd seen the girls. Nothing. The worry began to rise like a slow tide. By 8 p.m., neighbors joined in searching the immediate area. Flashlights cut through the encroaching dusk. Parents called out into the darkness, hoping for the sound of little feet racing home. But there was only the crash of waves against the shore. By nightfall, the police were notified, and a formal missing persons report was filed. The backyard, the beach, the woods, and even local buildings were searched with growing urgency. Yet, no signs of struggle, no cries for help, just an empty bucket found near the trail and 2 tiny sets of footprints that vanished in the sand. The news of Lily and Grace's disappearance spread through Westbridge like wildfire. By the early hours of the following morning, the small town had mobilized. Local law enforcement, firefighters, fishermen, and dozens of volunteers formed search parties. They combed every inch of the coastal trails, beaches, and surrounding forests. The community, close-knit and protective, was shaken. It was almost impossible to imagine that 2 young girls could simply vanish in such a familiar place. People who had lived there their whole lives started to second-guess their surroundings. The town that once felt so safe now felt laced with shadows. Searchers moved in tight lines through thick brush, calling the girls' names, hoping for any sound, any rustle of leaves. Bloodhounds were brought in from a neighboring county, their noses pressed to one of Grace's small t-shirts and Lily's worn-out hairband in an effort to pick up a trail. For a moment, the dogs led teams toward the northern cliffs, but the scent stopped cold near the edge where strong coastal winds erased all traces. A helicopter hovered above, scanning with thermal imaging equipment, while divers searched offshore areas near the beach. Nothing. No clothing. No signs of a struggle. No screams had been heard. It was as if the ocean had swallowed them whole, or they had simply stepped into thin air. Back at the Tanners' modest home, reporters had started to arrive. The parents, huddled in their living room, were pale and exhausted, answering questions between tears, begging the public for help. Flyers bearing the girls' photos were printed and posted in every shop window, pinned to telephone poles, and handed out to anyone passing through town. A hotline was established. The story made local news within hours, and by the next day, it was featured on regional television. Still, no leads came in that brought them any closer to finding Lily and Grace. What disturbed people most was the complete lack of evidence. No tire tracks. No foreign footprints. No discarded items. Just a plastic bucket found near the path leading to the beach, sitting upright, as though the girls had set it down gently and walked away. Detectives began to consider the worst possibilities: abduction, foul play. But by whom? In such a small town, everyone knew everyone. No strangers had been reported. No one suspicious seen. Theories blossomed, but none led anywhere solid. Despite the relentless effort, the days turned into weeks. The search slowly shrank as exhaustion and hopelessness set in. Eventually, the media moved on, and only the family and a few dedicated officers clung to hope. The girls had vanished, without noise, without trace, and Westbridge would never be the same again. As summer faded into fall, the town of Westbridge settled into a new, unfamiliar rhythm, one marked by silence, suspicion, and grief. Lily and Grace's disappearance had left an open wound that refused to heal. The playground by the beach, once filled with children's laughter, now stood eerily quiet. Parents grew more protective, rarely letting their children out of sight. Stranger danger talks replaced bedtime stories, and every new face in town was met with quiet scrutiny. There was a collective unease, a lingering fear that someone out there still knew something, or worse, had gotten away with something unspeakable. The Tanner family tried to hold on. Their once cheerful home, filled with the sounds of giggles and bouncing feet, had become a shell of itself. The girls' shared bedroom remained untouched, stuffed animals arranged neatly on the beds, crayon drawings still taped to the wall. Each morning, their mother placed a pair of cereal bowls on the kitchen table, unable to break the habit. Their father threw himself into work, avoiding reporters, friends, even neighbors. Grief was a quiet force that moved through the house like a ghost, touching every moment with sorrow. The police department, though small, had been determined. For the first few months, they pursued every possible lead, re-interviewing neighbors, checking school records, following up on distant tips. But as each lead turned into a dead end, their momentum slowed. Without witnesses or physical evidence, there was little more they could do. Eventually, the case was labeled inactive, though never officially closed. Files were boxed up and shelved, and the officers moved on to other duties. But in town, the case never truly faded. Whispers lingered in coffee shops and barber shops. Some believed the girls had been taken by someone they knew. Others speculated about a drifter who passed through that summer. A few held to the haunting belief that the sea had claimed them. It was easier, in a way, to think they were lost to the ocean rather than imagine something more sinister. But the unknown festered. For 15 years, the town lived with that aching uncertainty. Each new storm that hit the coast, each time debris washed ashore, people wondered, could this be a sign? Could they finally be coming home? No memorials were held. No grave markers were placed. The hope, however faint, still lingered for the Tanners. Every birthday, every holiday, every missed milestone left a deeper ache. They continued to set 2 extra places at the table during Thanksgiving. They lit candles at Christmas. Their mother even kept the porch light on every night, just in case Lily and Grace found their way back, no matter how many years passed. It was an unusually calm morning on the sea in early July of 2000 when Jacob Morley, a local fisherman, set out from the Westbridge marina before dawn. The waters were glassy, reflecting the soft hues of a rising sun as his trawler crept across the surface. Jacob had fished these waters for over 30 years and knew every tide, every current, every shallow rock formation. He cast his net as he always did, expecting the usual mix of cod and bottom feeders. But that day, something strange pulled at the gear. It was heavy, heavier than any catch he'd hauled in recent memory, and lodged deep in the net's tangled folds. At first, Jacob thought it was a rusted anchor or discarded junk. As he winched it up, the mass broke the surface with a splash, revealing a large, barnacle-crusted metal container. It looked like an old utility trunk, rectangular and corroded, the kind you might find in a military surplus yard decades ago. Seaweed and debris clung to it. Whatever was inside had been underwater for a long time. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, Jacob hauled it onto the deck. As the water drained off, a foul, musty odor escaped the rusted hinges. He radioed the Coast Guard immediately, his instincts warning him that this wasn't something to handle alone. Within hours, authorities arrived and secured the container. It was carefully transported to a secure facility, where a team of forensic experts began the process of opening it. Cameras rolled as law enforcement stood by in hushed anticipation. When the lid finally creaked open, everyone in the room froze. Inside was a collection of decayed items, pieces of children's clothing, a small pair of pink sneakers still faintly recognizable under the grime, and a moldy, discolored stuffed animal, a dog with one eye missing. These weren't just lost items. They were evidence. Then, buried beneath a layer of soaked fabric and plastic sheeting, investigators found bones, small, delicate, unmistakably human. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Within days, the news had spread. The remains of 2 young girls had been pulled from the sea, just miles from where Lily and Grace Tanner vanished 15 years earlier. Although official confirmation through DNA testing was still pending, deep down, Westbridge already knew. The ocean had kept its secret for over a decade and a half, but now, it had finally given something back. The lab results came back quicker than expected. Advances in forensic technology meant that even after 15 years submerged in saltwater, the small fragments of bone, hair strands, and traces of tissue were enough to extract viable DNA. The process was meticulous, handled with care and silence. When the confirmation finally arrived, no one was surprised, but everyone was shaken. The remains belonged to Lily and Grace Tanner. The little girls who had once played on a sunny summer day in 1985 were now a heartbreaking case closed by the ocean's reluctant confession. News of the DNA confirmation sent a jolt through Westbridge. For a town that had lived in quiet torment for a decade and a half, the truth was both a relief and a fresh wound. The headlines were immediate and merciless. Missing sisters found in ocean trunk. Cold case breaks after 15 years. Westbridge mystery solved in Fisherman's net. Television crews returned. Reporters lined up outside the Tanner home once again, and questions buzzed like hornets. Who did this? Why? How had they ended up at sea in a metal box? The coroner's report revealed chilling details. Though the bodies were too decomposed to establish a precise cause of death, certain conclusions could be drawn. The container had been intentionally sealed, airtight in places, lined crudely with tar and plastic. It was clear the trunk had not simply fallen into the sea. It had been placed there, deliberately sunk, most likely from a small boat. The level of effort, planning, and concealment suggested premeditation. This was not a panicked act, it was methodical. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure the girls would never be found. Alongside the remains were additional items, now treated as key evidence. A rusted tin box containing buttons, beads, and a few folded pieces of notebook paper was discovered tucked into the corner of the trunk. One page, in childlike handwriting, read, "He told us it was a game. We had to be quiet." That single line hit investigators like a gut punch. It confirmed what everyone feared: this was not an accident. The girls had been manipulated, lured, and ultimately betrayed. The Tanner family received the news in private. Their grief, long buried beneath years of hope and denial, surfaced in waves. Their mother clutched the pink sneakers and broke down. Their father, usually composed, stared into the distance for hours, wordless. For them, closure didn't mean peace, it meant reliving every moment, now with finality. The loss was no longer just emotional, it was physical, real, and irreversible. But with the confirmation also came resolve. The police reopened the case immediately. The past was no longer closed, there were leads to pursue, suspects to re-examine, and justice to chase. What had once been a quiet, unsolvable mystery now had hard evidence. And with that, the hunt for answers began anew. The tin box found in the corner of the trunk had been overlooked at first glance, camouflaged by grime and rust, its edges fused shut by years of saltwater corrosion. But when forensic analysts finally pried it open, they discovered its haunting contents: fragments of a child's voice captured in delicate, water-stained notebook pages. Inside were several sheets, torn and folded, each containing uneven handwriting that suggested it belonged to Lily, the older sister. The ink had bled in places, and parts of the pages were too damaged to recover, but the words that remained painted a picture more chilling than anyone expected. The first legible page began with an innocent tone: "We're going somewhere fun." He said, "There's a secret cave near the beach." Grace brought her doll. "I brought my notebook. We're not supposed to tell Mom." He said, "It's a game." The investigators read the sentences in stunned silence. It was clear that whoever had lured the girls away had earned their trust, or at least disguised their intentions well enough to pass as harmless. The girls hadn't been frightened at first. They had followed someone willingly. That realization struck the community hard. If the girls had known their captor, then the perpetrator could have been someone from Westbridge. Someone they saw regularly. Someone who blended in. Another entry was shorter, written more hurriedly, and stained beyond recognition in several places. But one line stood out: "It's dark here. Grace is scared. He hasn't come back yet." The tone had shifted. The excitement was gone, replaced with confusion, maybe fear. It suggested that the girls had been left alone, possibly in the trunk or somewhere nearby, before the final act. That line alone led detectives to theorize that the perpetrator might have imprisoned them before disposing of the container. It raised more horrifying questions than it answered. How long were they alive? Did they understand what was happening? The final legible entry was no more than a sentence, but it chilled even the most seasoned investigators. He told us we had to sleep now. That it would be quiet soon. The implications were devastating. The girls had been manipulated to the end, likely given false comfort in their final moments. Whether drugged, suffocated, or left to succumb to the lack of oxygen in the sealed container, they were still children, trusting, innocent, and utterly defenseless. This journal shifted the entire direction of the case. Now there was psychological evidence, insight into the mind of the killer, and into the final thoughts of the victims. Law enforcement began cross-referencing the handwriting, interviewing teachers who might recognize the penmanship, and bringing in behavioral experts. The FBI offered assistance, noting that the crime had the hallmarks of someone methodical, familiar to the area, and most disturbingly, patient. The diary also confirmed that the girls hadn't been abducted by force from the start. They had been groomed, misled, perhaps even visited more than once before the day of their disappearance. Someone had planned this over time. And someone had gone to great lengths to silence their story, until now. For the Tanner family, reading the diary pages was both a gift and a curse. They finally knew some of what their daughters went through. But knowing brought fresh grief. There was no longer room for comforting illusions. Their daughters had died not just as victims of a tragic mystery, but as prey to a calculated monster who had walked among them for years. And now, with the words of Lily guiding them, the hunt for that monster would begin in earnest. With the discovery of the remains and the haunting diary entries, the police reopened the case with renewed determination. 15 years had passed, but the chilling evidence breathed new life into an investigation that once seemed hopeless. Detectives pored over the old files, re-examining every witness statement, tip, and piece of physical evidence from 1985. What had been dismissed or overlooked in the frenzy of the original search was now scrutinized under the harsh light of modern forensic methods and psychological profiling. One name kept resurfacing: Daniel Harper, a man who had lived just 2 streets away from the Tanner family at the time of the disappearance. Daniel was known locally as a quiet, somewhat reclusive figure with a checkered past that included accusations of minor offenses and rumors of inappropriate behavior toward children. When the girls vanished, he had been questioned briefly by police but was never formally charged or detained. His alibi then had been vague but unchallenged, and he had moved away shortly after the case went cold, leaving Westbridge behind. Detectives reached out and tracked him down in a neighboring state. When they interviewed him, Daniel appeared calm and cooperative, but his answers were evasive. He claimed to have no memory of the girls or their disappearance, insisting he had nothing to hide. Yet, inconsistencies emerged. His timeline didn't fully add up, and forensic evidence from the recovered items was reanalyzed for any trace of his DNA or fingerprints. Psychological experts suggested Daniel fit the profile of a calculated predator, someone capable of planning and executing a crime with patience and cold precision. They theorized he might have ingratiated himself to the girls and their family to gain their trust before abducting them. Local residents began to recall small, unsettling incidents from the past, times Daniel had been overly interested in the girls or seen lurking near the beach at odd hours. As the investigation deepened, other potential witnesses came forward. A former acquaintance revealed that Daniel had once confided in him about dark thoughts and feelings of resentment. Another mentioned seeing him with a large, suspicious-looking trunk around the time of the girl's disappearance. It became clear that the community's quiet suspicions were not baseless. Armed with this mounting evidence, law enforcement prepared to arrest Daniel Harper. The case, once cold and forgotten, was now a blaze of renewed hope for justice. Though it had taken 15 long years, the truth was finally within reach. The haunting silence that had gripped Westbridge began to crack, as the town braced itself for the reckoning that Daniel's arrest would bring, not only for the police but for the families who had waited so long for answers. This resurgence of the case also sparked wider conversations about community safety, the importance of vigilance, and how crucial it is never to forget the missing. The legacy of Lily and Grace became a rallying cry for protecting children and ensuring that no tragedy is ever truly buried by time. With the discovery of the remains and the haunting diary entries, the police reopened the case with renewed determination. 15 years had passed, but the chilling evidence breathed new life into an investigation that once seemed hopeless. Detectives pored over the old files, re-examining every witness statement, tip, and piece of physical evidence from 1985. What had been dismissed or overlooked in the frenzy of the original search was now scrutinized under the harsh light of modern forensic methods and psychological profiling. One name kept resurfacing: Daniel Harper, a man who had lived just 2 streets away from the Tanner family at the time of the disappearance. Daniel was known locally as a quiet, somewhat reclusive figure with a checkered past that included accusations of minor offenses and rumors of inappropriate behavior toward children. When the girls vanished, he had been questioned briefly by police but was never formally charged or detained. His alibi then had been vague but unchallenged, and he had moved away shortly after the case went cold, leaving Westbridge behind. Detectives reached out and tracked him down in a neighboring state. When they interviewed him, Daniel appeared calm and cooperative, but his answers were evasive. He claimed to have no memory of the girls or their disappearance, insisting he had nothing to hide. Yet, inconsistencies emerged. His timeline didn't fully add up, and forensic evidence from the recovered items was reanalyzed for any trace of his DNA or fingerprints. Psychological experts suggested Daniel fit the profile of a calculated predator, someone capable of planning and executing a crime with patience and cold precision. They theorized he might have ingratiated himself to the girls and their family to gain their trust before abducting them. Local residents began to recall small, unsettling incidents from the past, times Daniel had been overly interested in the girls or seen lurking near the beach at odd hours. As the investigation deepened, other potential witnesses came forward. A former acquaintance revealed that Daniel had once confided in him about dark thoughts and feelings of resentment. Another mentioned seeing him with a large, suspicious-looking trunk around the time of the girls' disappearance. It became clear that the community's quiet suspicions were not baseless. Armed with this mounting evidence, law enforcement prepared to arrest Daniel Harper. The case, once cold and forgotten, was now a blaze of renewed hope for justice. Though it had taken 15 long years, the truth was finally within reach. The haunting silence that had gripped Westbridge began to crack, as the town braced itself for the reckoning that Daniel's arrest would bring, not only for the police but for the families who had waited so long for answers. This resurgence of the case also sparked wider conversations about community safety, the importance of vigilance, and how crucial it is never to forget the missing. The legacy of Lily and Grace became a rallying cry for protecting children and ensuring that no tragedy is ever truly buried by time.